Sarah Martinez stepped through the heavy metal doors of the Naval Special Warfare Command facility, her combat boots echoing against the polished concrete floor. The fluorescent lights above cast harsh shadows across her face, revealing the purple bruising around her left eye and the fresh cut along her jawline. Her marine dress blue uniform was immaculate despite the visible signs of recent combat, each ribbon and medal perfectly aligned across her chest. The facility buzzed with the usual morning activity. Navy SEALs moved through the corridors with their characteristic confidence, discussing training exercises and upcoming deployments. The air smelled of gun oil, coffee, and the faint scent of ocean salt that seemed to permeate every military installation near the coast. Sarah had been here before, but today felt different. Today, she carried news that would change everything. As she walked down the main hallway, conversations gradually died down. One by one, the SEALs noticed her presence. It wasn't just her gender that caught their attention, though women were still relatively rare in these elite circles. It was something else entirely. The way she carried herself spoke of recent battle, of missions completed under the most dangerous circumstances imaginable. Commander Jake Thompson was the first to recognize her. He had served alongside Sarah during a joint operation in Afghanistan 2 years earlier. Back then, she had been a sergeant leading a Marine reconnaissance team. Now, the silver bars on her collar indicated her promotion to first lieutenant. But it wasn't her rank that made him straighten his posture and signal to his men. Thompson remembered the night Sarah's team had saved his SEAL unit from an ambush in the mountains outside Kandahar. They had been pinned down by enemy fire for 6 hours, running low on ammunition and with 2 wounded men who couldn't be moved. Sarah's Marines had fought through enemy lines to reach them, carrying medical supplies and providing covering fire for their extraction. She had personally dragged one of his wounded SEALs to safety while under heavy gunfire. The bruises on her face told a story that every combat veteran could read. Fresh injuries meant recent action. Recent action in their line of work usually meant someone had paid the ultimate price to complete the mission. As more SEALs gathered in the hallway, an unspoken understanding passed between them. This woman had been in the fight, and, from the look of determination in her eyes, she had won. Sarah's destination was the briefing room at the end of the hall, where she was scheduled to deliver her after-action report to the Joint Task Force commanders. The folder in her hand contained classified documents detailing Operation Silent Thunder, a mission that had taken place just 48 hours earlier in a location that would remain classified for decades to come. The mission had been Sarah's idea from the beginning. Intelligence reports had indicated that a high-value target was hiding in a compound that conventional forces couldn't reach without causing significant civilian casualties. The target was responsible for coordinating attacks against American forces across 3 different countries. Taking him alive was the priority, but the location made a standard assault impossible. Sarah had proposed using a small Marine reconnaissance team to infiltrate the area and provide real-time intelligence for a precision SEAL strike. The plan was risky, requiring her team to maintain position within enemy territory for 36 hours while gathering intelligence and marking targets for the incoming assault force. What the mission planners hadn't anticipated was the early arrival of enemy reinforcements. Sarah's team found themselves surrounded with no clear extraction route. Rather than abort the mission and lose their only chance at the target, Sarah made the decision to maintain their position and continue providing intelligence support. For 18 hours, her 4-person team held their ground against overwhelming odds. They called in precise coordinates for airstrikes, marked enemy positions for the incoming SEAL team, and maintained communication with command despite being under constant fire. When her radio operator was wounded by shrapnel from a mortar round, Sarah took over communications herself while still coordinating her team's defensive positions. The SEALs who now watched her walk down their hallway didn't yet know the full details of what had happened, but they recognized the signs. The precise way she moved despite obvious fatigue, the alert scanning of her surroundings even in a secure facility, and the careful way she held her left arm all indicated recent combat stress and injury. What they would learn later was that Sarah's mission had been a complete success. The high-value target had been captured alive, along with intelligence that would prevent dozens of future attacks. But the cost had been significant. One of her Marines hadn't made it home, and Sarah herself had been wounded when the extraction helicopter came under fire during their escape. As she reached the briefing room door, Sarah paused and turned to acknowledge the SEALs who had been watching her progress down the hall. She didn't smile, but she gave a slight nod of recognition. These were her brothers and sisters in arms, warriors who understood the weight of the sacrifices required in their line of work. Commander Thompson stepped forward and offered a crisp salute, which Sarah returned with equal precision. The gesture was formal, but the respect behind it was deeply personal. In that moment, every SEAL in the hallway understood that they were witnessing something significant. This wasn't just a Marine delivering a routine report. This was a warrior returning from battle, carrying the memories of fallen comrades and the weight of a mission accomplished against all odds. The briefing room door closed behind her, but the impact of her presence lingered in the hallway. Conversations resumed, but the tone had changed. The SEALs spoke in quieter voices, with the reverence that combat veterans reserve for discussing recent losses and hard-won victories. Inside the briefing room, Sarah took her seat at the long conference table and opened her folder. The next few hours would be spent recounting every detail of Operation Silent Thunder, analyzing what went right and what could be improved for future missions. But, before she began, she took a moment to honor the memory of Corporal David Chen, the Marine who wouldn't be returning home to his family in California. The story of what happened during those critical 48 hours would become legend within the Special Operations community, but Sarah would never speak of it outside official channels. That was the unwritten code among warriors like her. The mission came first, personal recognition came last, and the memory of fallen comrades was sacred above all else. The briefing room fell silent as Sarah began her account of Operation Silent Thunder. Around the table sat some of the most decorated officers in the Navy and Marine Corps, men and women who had seen decades of combat between them. Yet as Sarah spoke, describing the events of the past 48 hours, even these veterans found themselves leaning forward, captivated by the precision and courage her story revealed. The mission had begun 3 weeks earlier with intercepted communications suggesting that Omar al-Rashid, a key figure in coordinating terrorist attacks across the region, would be meeting with local cell leaders at a compound in the mountains. The location was strategically chosen by the terrorists, situated in a valley surrounded by civilian settlements that made conventional assault impossible without significant collateral damage. Sarah's commanding officer, Colonel James Mitchell, had initially been skeptical of her proposed infiltration plan. The idea of inserting a small Marine reconnaissance team deep into enemy territory to provide intelligence for a follow-up SEAL operation was ambitious, but the risks were enormous. The nearest friendly forces would be over 50 miles away, and extraction would depend entirely on helicopter support that couldn't be guaranteed in the mountainous terrain. However, Sarah's track record spoke for itself. Over the past 3 years, she had led 17 successful reconnaissance missions, each one gathering critical intelligence that had saved American lives and disrupted enemy operations. Her team was hand-picked, consisting of Marines who had served with her through multiple deployments and shared an almost telepathic understanding of each other's capabilities. The team included Sergeant Mike Rodriguez, a communications specialist who could maintain radio contact under the most challenging conditions. His equipment included encrypted satellite radios, backup communication devices, and the technical expertise to tap into enemy communications networks. Rodriguez had earned his reputation during a mission in Syria where he had maintained contact with headquarters for 72 hours straight while his team was surrounded by hostile forces. Corporal David Chen served as the team's designated marksman and explosives expert. At 24 years old, he was the youngest member of the team, but his skills were legendary within the reconnaissance community. Chen could place a rifle shot accurately at distances exceeding 800 meters and had an intuitive understanding of explosives that made him invaluable for sabotage operations. More importantly, his calm demeanor under pressure had earned him the complete trust of his teammates. The fourth member was Lance Corporal Maria Santos, a medic and intelligence analyst whose language skills and cultural knowledge made her essential for operations in the region. Santos spoke fluent Arabic and Pashto, allowing the team to understand enemy communications and interact with local populations when necessary. Her medical training had already saved the lives of 3 Marines during previous deployments. The insertion had gone perfectly. Under cover of darkness, a special operations helicopter had delivered the team to a landing zone 12 miles from their target. From there, they had moved on foot through mountainous terrain, using night vision equipment and GPS coordinates to navigate to their observation post. By dawn, they were in position on a ridge overlooking the target compound, completely undetected by enemy forces. For the first 24 hours, everything proceeded according to plan. The team gathered detailed intelligence about the compound's layout, identified guard positions, and documented the arrival of several high-value targets. Sarah's regular reports to headquarters provided the SEAL assault team with everything they needed to plan their attack. The compound itself was a sprawling complex of buildings surrounded by high walls and guard towers. Intelligence estimates suggested that between 30 and 50 enemy fighters were present, armed with automatic weapons, rocket-propelled grenades, and at least one heavy machine gun mounted on the main building's roof. The terrorists had chosen their location well, with clear fields of fire in all directions and multiple escape routes through the surrounding mountains. Sarah's team documented every detail, creating detailed maps of the compound's defenses and identifying the building where al-Rashid was most likely staying. They also noted the presence of several civilian vehicles and evidence that non-combatants, possibly including women and children, were present in the compound. This intelligence would be crucial for the SEAL team to minimize civilian casualties during their assault. On the second night of the operation, everything changed. Sarah was monitoring enemy radio communications when she heard reports of additional fighters moving toward the compound. Within hours, what had been a manageable target became a heavily defended fortress as enemy reinforcements arrived in trucks and all-terrain vehicles. The original estimate of 50 fighters quickly doubled, then tripled. The arrival of the reinforcements also brought sophisticated equipment that the team hadn't anticipated. Thermal imaging devices, night vision equipment, and communication gear that suggested the presence of foreign military advisors. Most concerning was the arrival of a technical vehicle mounted with a heavy machine gun and what appeared to be surface-to-air missiles. Sarah faced an impossible decision. The original mission parameters called for aborting the operation if enemy strength exceeded predetermined levels. The presence of surface-to-air missiles posed a significant threat to the extraction helicopter, and the increased number of fighters made the SEAL assault far more dangerous. Standard operating procedure dictated that she should call for immediate extraction and recommend postponing the mission. However, intelligence reports indicated that this might be the only opportunity to capture al-Rashid for months, possibly years. The terrorist leader was known for his paranoia and rarely stayed in one location for more than a few days. If they missed this chance, hundreds of American servicemen and innocent civilians might pay the price for attacks that al-Rashid would coordinate from his next hiding place. After consulting with her team, Sarah made the decision to maintain their position and continue the mission. She reported the changed circumstances to headquarters, providing detailed information about the new threats while recommending that the SEAL assault proceed with modified tactics to account for the increased enemy presence. The response from headquarters was immediate and clear. The mission was too dangerous to continue, and the team was ordered to move to the extraction point for immediate pickup. But Sarah knew that once they left their observation post, the opportunity would be lost forever. Al-Rashid would disappear again, and the intelligence they had gathered would become worthless. In a decision that would later be studied in military leadership courses, Sarah requested permission to maintain their position for 12 more hours, long enough to provide intelligence support for a dawn assault by the SEAL team. She argued that her team's position remained secure and that the intelligence they were providing was too valuable to abandon. The silence from headquarters stretched for nearly 30 minutes before Colonel Mitchell's voice crackled through her radio with authorization to proceed. The SEAL assault was being moved up to take advantage of the pre-dawn darkness, and Sarah's team would provide real-time intelligence until the moment the attack began. The dawn assault began exactly as planned, but within minutes, Sarah realized that the enemy had been expecting them. The compound erupted in coordinated defensive fire that suggested advance warning of the incoming attack. Tracer rounds lit up the pre-dawn darkness as the SEAL team's helicopters approached the target, and the distinctive sound of surface-to-air missiles launched from multiple positions around the compound. From her observation post, Sarah watched helplessly as one of the approaching helicopters took evasive action, barely avoiding a missile that exploded just meters from its rotor system. The pilot's skill kept the aircraft in the air, but the near miss forced all the helicopters to modify their approach, giving the defenders more time to prepare their positions. Sarah immediately began calling in precise coordinates for supporting artillery strikes, working to suppress the missile positions before they could engage the helicopters again. Her communications with the fire support coordinator were crisp and professional, but she could hear the stress in Rodriguez's voice as he relayed her targeting information while monitoring multiple radio frequencies for signs that their own position had been compromised. The first indication that something had gone seriously wrong came when Chen spotted movement on the ridge to their east. Through his rifle scope, he identified at least a dozen enemy fighters moving in their direction, apparently having been positioned specifically to counter any observation posts overlooking the compound. The enemy had learned from previous operations and had posted security teams on the surrounding high ground. Sarah's tactical situation had suddenly become desperate. Her team was being approached from the east while the main assault was taking place below them in the valley. If they abandoned their position, the SEAL team would lose their intelligence support at the most critical moment of the operation. If they stayed, they risked being overrun by the approaching enemy fighters. The decision was made easier by Rodriguez's report that he was intercepting enemy radio traffic coordinating the attack on their position. The enemy knew exactly where they were and was moving to eliminate them before they could provide effective support to the assault team. Sarah's team was no longer just observers, they had become active participants in a life-or-death battle. Santos took up a defensive position covering the eastern approach while Chen began engaging targets at maximum range, using his marksmanship skills to slow the enemy advance. Each shot was carefully placed, not just to eliminate threats but to force the approaching fighters to take cover and buy precious time for the assault team below. The sound of Chen's rifle became a steady rhythm punctuating the chaos of the main battle. Sarah could see him working methodically through his ammunition, each shot accounting for another enemy fighter who would not threaten the mission or her team. His calm professionalism under pressure was exactly what she had come to expect from him, but she also knew that their ammunition was limited and the enemy reinforcements seemed endless. Rodriguez continued his dual role of maintaining communication with the assault team while monitoring enemy frequencies. His reports painted an increasingly grim picture as more enemy fighters converged on their position from multiple directions. What had begun as a dozen fighters approaching from the east had grown to include additional groups moving up from the south and north, effectively surrounding the observation post. Despite the deteriorating situation, Sarah maintained her focus on supporting the SEAL assault. Her precise coordinates for artillery strikes were systematically destroying the compound's defensive positions, allowing the SEAL team to advance toward their primary objective. The building where al-Rashid was believed to be hiding was now within reach, but only if Sarah's team could continue providing fire support for a few more minutes. The moment that would haunt Sarah for the rest of her life came when a mortar round exploded just 20 meters from their position. The blast threw her against the rocks behind their fighting position, temporarily stunning her and filling the air with dust and debris. When her vision cleared, she saw Rodriguez slumped over his radio equipment, blood streaming from a head wound caused by flying rock fragments. Without hesitation, Santos abandoned her defensive position to provide medical care to Rodriguez while Sarah took over the radio duties. The communications equipment had been damaged by the blast, but it was still functional enough to maintain contact with the assault team and artillery support. Sarah found herself simultaneously coordinating fire support, monitoring her team's defensive positions, and trying to assess the extent of Rodriguez's injuries. Chen's rifle fire had become more urgent now, as the enemy fighters had closed to within 200 meters of their position. His ammunition was running low, forcing him to make every shot count while the approaching fighters used fire and movement tactics to advance under cover. Sarah could see muzzle flashes from at least 3 different directions, confirming that they were indeed surrounded. The breakthrough moment came when Rodriguez regained consciousness and, despite his injuries, managed to establish contact with an AC-130 gunship that had been orbiting the area. The heavily armed aircraft had been waiting for clearance to engage targets around the compound, but the proximity of friendly forces had prevented its use until now. With enemy fighters closing on the observation post, the rules of engagement suddenly became much simpler. Sarah provided precise coordinates for the approaching enemy positions, calling in strikes that walked progressively closer to her own team's location. The 40mm cannon fire from the gunship was devastatingly accurate, systematically eliminating the enemy fighters who had been moving to overrun the observation post. Each explosion sent shockwaves through the rocky terrain, but also bought precious time for the mission to continue. In the valley below, the SEAL assault team had reached the main building and was preparing to breach the entrance where Al-Rashid was believed to be hiding. Sarah's artillery support had cleared most of the external defenses, but intelligence reports suggested that the building itself was heavily fortified with multiple defensive positions and possible booby traps. The final phase of the operation required Sarah's team to maintain overwatch while the SEALs cleared the building room by room. This was the most dangerous part of the mission for both units, as any remaining enemy fighters would make their last stand inside the structure where close-quarters combat would prevent the use of heavy weapons or air support. Chen had switched to his backup weapon system, a shorter-range carbine that was better suited for engaging targets at closer distances. The enemy forces that had survived the gunship strikes were now within 100 meters of the observation post, close enough that Sarah could hear their voices as they coordinated their final assault on her position. Santos had managed to stabilize Rodriguez's condition, but he was in no condition to operate his communication equipment effectively. Sarah found herself managing multiple radio frequencies while also directing her team's defensive fire and providing intelligence to the SEAL team below. The level of multitasking required was beyond what most people could handle under normal circumstances, let alone while under direct enemy fire. The end of the battle came suddenly and decisively. The SEAL team's breach of the main building was successful, resulting in the capture of Al-Rashid and 2 other high-value targets. The intelligence gathered from the compound would later prevent dozens of planned attacks and save countless lives. But the cost of success was about to become tragically clear to Sarah's team. The extraction helicopter's approach was the sweetest sound Sarah had heard in 36 hours, but it also marked the beginning of the most dangerous phase of the entire operation. The aircraft would have to land in a confined area while under potential enemy fire, load her team and their equipment, and escape through mountain terrain that limited maneuver options and made them vulnerable to the remaining surface-to-air missiles. Chen had expended almost all of his ammunition maintaining their defensive perimeter, and Santos was effectively acting as a one-person medical team keeping Rodriguez stable while continuing to provide security. Sarah herself was operating on adrenaline and determination, having gone without sleep for over 40 hours while managing the complex coordination required to support both her own team and the SEAL assault. The helicopter pilot, Chief Warrant Officer Lisa Park, was a veteran of dozens of similar extractions and understood the urgency of the situation. Her approach to the landing zone was aggressive and precise, using the mountainous terrain to mask her helicopter's approach until the last possible moment. The distinctive sound of her aircraft's rotors was the signal Sarah's team had been waiting for, but it also announced their location to any remaining enemy forces in the area. As the helicopters settled into the improvised landing zone, Sarah's team began their movement toward the aircraft with Rodriguez being supported by Santos while Chen provided rear security. The rocky terrain made movement difficult, especially while carrying their wounded teammate and essential equipment that contained intelligence gathered during the operation. The first rocket-propelled grenade exploded just as Sarah reached the helicopter's loading ramp. The blast knocked her to the ground and filled the air with rock fragments and dust, but, more importantly, it confirmed that enemy fighters were still active in the area and had positioned themselves to target the extraction aircraft. Chen immediately identified the source of the RPG fire and began engaging the position with his remaining ammunition. His accurate rifle fire forced the enemy fighters to seek cover, but Sarah could see additional muzzle flashes from positions around the landing zone. The enemy had anticipated the extraction attempt and had prepared an ambush designed to trap the helicopter on the ground. Park's voice crackled through the helicopter's communication system, reporting that her aircraft was taking small arms fire from multiple directions. The helicopter's armor could protect against rifle rounds, but another RPG hit could disable the aircraft and strand everyone in enemy territory. The extraction had to be completed quickly, before the enemy could bring heavier weapons to bear. Rodriguez, despite his injuries, managed to establish communication with the AC-130 gunship that was still orbiting overhead. His coordinates for defensive fire were slightly slurred due to his concussion, but accurate enough to guide suppressive fire against the enemy positions threatening the extraction site. The heavy cannon fire from the aircraft provided the covering fire necessary for the team to reach the helicopter safely. Sarah was the last member of her team to board the aircraft, ensuring that Rodriguez, Santos, and Chen were secured before she climbed aboard herself. As she strapped herself into the helicopter's crew seat, she could see Chen slumped against the bulkhead, his rifle still in his hands but his eyes closed. It was only then that she realized he had been wounded during the final exchange of fire. Santos immediately began providing medical care to Chen while the helicopter lifted off from the landing zone. Her initial assessment revealed that he had sustained a gunshot wound to his upper torso, apparently from one of the enemy fighters who had gotten close enough to the landing zone to fire through the gaps in the helicopter's armor plating. The flight back to base was a nightmare of mountain flying while under potential threat from surface-to-air missiles. Park flew an evasive route that took advantage of every ridge and valley to minimize their exposure to enemy fire, but the mountainous terrain also limited their options for medical evacuation if Chen's condition deteriorated. Sarah found herself holding pressure on Chen's wound while Santos worked to stabilize his vital signs. Rodriguez, despite his own injuries, maintained communication with medical personnel at their base, providing updates on Chen's condition and ensuring that trauma surgeons would be waiting when they arrived. The young Marine was conscious but weak, speaking quietly to Sarah about his family and his plans after his deployment ended. He had recently become engaged to his college girlfriend and was planning to use his military benefits to complete his engineering degree. The conversation was heartbreaking for Sarah, who understood that Chen's wounds were more serious than any of them wanted to acknowledge. When the helicopter finally approached their base, Sarah could see the medical team waiting on the landing pad with all the equipment necessary for emergency trauma care. The efficiency of the medical response was a testament to the military's commitment to never leaving anyone behind, but Sarah knew that some wounds go beyond what any medical team can repair. Chen was conscious when they loaded him onto the medical stretcher, and he managed to give Sarah a weak thumbs up before the medical team rushed him into the trauma center. That simple gesture would be burned into Sarah's memory forever, a final moment of connection with a Marine who had given everything for the mission and his teammates. The debriefing process began immediately, with intelligence officers eager to learn everything about the operation while the information was still fresh. Sarah's report would be crucial for planning future operations and understanding how the enemy had managed to anticipate their tactics. However, the military also understood that her team needed medical care and rest before any formal debriefing could take place. Rodriguez was hospitalized with a severe concussion and would require several weeks of recovery before returning to duty. Santos had sustained minor injuries from rock fragments but was cleared for duty after treatment. Sarah herself had bruised ribs and multiple contusions from the various explosions and impacts during the operation, but nothing that would prevent her from completing her report. The news about Chen came 6 hours after their return to base. Despite the best efforts of the trauma team, he had not survived his injuries. The bullet had caused internal damage that proved impossible to repair, and he had died peacefully with medical personnel at his side. Sarah received the news in the base commander's office, surrounded by officers who understood the weight of losing a team member. The official commendation would come later, recognizing the success of Operation Silent Thunder and the intelligence that had been gathered. The capture of al-Rashid and his associates would prevent countless future attacks and save numerous lives. The mission would be studied as an example of successful joint operations between Marine reconnaissance units and Navy SEAL assault teams. However, for Sarah, the true measure of the operation's success would always be overshadowed by the loss of David Chen. The young Marine had died doing what he believed in, protecting his teammates and completing a mission that served the greater good. His sacrifice would be honored by those who served with him, but it would also serve as a constant reminder of the price of freedom. As Sarah walked down the hallway of the Naval Special Warfare Command facility, delivering her final report on Operation Silent Thunder, she carried with her the memory of every Marine and SEAL who had contributed to the mission's success. The bruises on her face would heal, but the responsibility of leadership and the memory of Chen's sacrifice would remain with her for the rest of her career. The SEALs who snapped to attention as she passed understood that they were witnessing something beyond military protocol. They were showing respect for a warrior who had faced impossible odds and made the hard decisions that others could not make. In their world, such respect was earned through actions, not words, and Sarah had proven herself worthy of their highest honor.